So, hey guys, welcome back to part two of our three-parter on building your own Alexa clone. This video will primarily be covering kind of the high levels of how the code works. I promise not to get into too much detail, as I know a lot of your eyes will glaze over. This isn't a lecture, this is purely a kind of basic tutorial on how to build something like Siri or Alexa yourself. So for this video, I'll be covering how the server interface works, how the server handles queries, how it breaks them down into natural language objects, and then how skills interact with those queries, and then how the responses are formatted. I'll also be covering how the client talks to the server, and keeping it again pretty high level, pretty basic, but it should give you enough of an overview, of enough of a briefing to really get into the code that's on GitHub. Build your own clients from mobile, build your own skills, and maybe even contribute to the project and add some fixes and patches and changes and all that good stuff. Video 3, which will be this time next week, will be covering how we build our own skills, how we extend the functionality of pBrain, and yeah, so let's get into some of the code. Okay, doke. So to kick things off, we have opened the project in Sublime Text, pretty standard text editor. You can use any IDE or text editor that you wish for whatever platform you're using, but I've chosen Sublime Text because I like it. Right, so what we have in front of us here is the communications portion of things. So the actual server.js, it being a Node application, we're using express.js to handle the HTTP communication between client and server. I won't go into what everything does. I'll leave that to you to figure out. But the two things that are kind of most important here are express.static. So app.use express.static, which exposes our web client, which is in the source directory, as you can see here. Our index.html is here. So when you go to localhost 4567, you will get served this index.html using this call here. Beyond that, we have our path to our API, which is our request or get request to pass a natural language query from a client to a server. Running through that in a bit more detail, you have the path defined here. Input is our query, and that's actually in the query object of the request that's being made. So rec.query and queue. So queue is our query that we've defined in our API call. I'll show you what that looks like. So if I go HTTP localhost 4567 / our path, which is API / ask, and then we go question mark, which defines we're specifying query parameters, and then I go queue, which is query, equals whatever, and you can see that the query queue is defined here, so we're pulling it out of the queries parameters, and we're defining it here in our call. So that's the whole path assembled using this port number specified down below. So once we've gotten our query's input from this, and we assigned it to this variable, it's a simple case of setting the response type, which we know is going to be JSON, and then getting the response. So search.query takes in the natural language query, and you can see search is pulling in from this module, so /API /core -ask.js, which is right here, as you can see in this folder. And we are calling the we're calling the query method in that module, which is mapped to underscore query internally, which is this function. So in order to make this work, you can see that we are getting the classification for our query that we're passing in here using our classifier. And the classifier is using the natural module, which allows for natural language breakdown, but that requires to be trained. So basically what this train recognizer function does is loops through our skills directory. You can see all the skill folders here, gets all of the names of these folders, and then goes in, pulls in the skill, gets these keywords, maps it to this coin, or the skill name in this case, and then trains up the recognizer, the recognizer which is in here, our classifier, with those skill keywords in order to understand the query. Now, it doesn't have to be exact matches to those keywords. It can be similar to those keywords as well, but as long as it's within a certain threshold, which is anything lower than 0.25 as the confidence. So it's confidence between 0 and 1. If it's lower than 0.25, it's confident enough that it selected the right context for the query that's been passed in. So that's all trained up by looking at the keywords specified in the skills. We then call the query function from our server, which takes in our query, breaks it down into a context, and then passes the context, or the skill name in this case, in result.label alongside the query to our response module. The response module is right here, and it's very simple. It takes the context name or the skill name, appends it to the skills directory, so we can pull in, say this context name is coin. We're then pulling in the coin module as a function, and we are calling the get method of the coin module, which is here, you can see. It then gets a single line response and returns that response. So going back to core ask, we've called our response.get function. We've now gotten a response object. We've now got a response string. We format a new object with the response string from our query, the name of the module, or the name of the skill, and the original query, and we return that back to the server. So it's as simple as that, right? It goes in, it takes the query, it breaks it down into a context, it finds a skill that matches that context, gets a result from that skill, and then returns it to the client who made the call. So res.send our result, our formatted result. If there was an error at any stage of the way, this try catch will find it, or will catch it. We'll log what the error was, and we'll return a sorry I didn't understand the query type message with an error parameter, so you can display an error message or an error icon. But quite honestly, it's as basic as that. It's a case of taking it in, breaking it down, finding the right way to handle it, and returning the result. It's not a complex learning engine. It's not a complex neural network. It's a very simple natural language to response converter, essentially. And because of the way we automatically pull in from the skills directory, assuming they have the right format, we can extend this with as many skills to do anything we want as possible. So now that you know how the communication between, how the server gets its communication in and how it responds, we need to now look at how the client makes a call to the server, gets back a response, and displays it. So I built a headless client which allows us to run a client in the terminal. It's a fairly basic client. It's using a couple of modules, the Snowboy module for hotware detection, and that's by a group called API.ai. So I've actually gone to their website, downloaded essentially a classifier for understanding the word brain, which is stored in the resources directory of our client. But basically, this is just a way of us turning speech to text. What's really important here is this call. So once we've gotten back our converted speech to text result from our with.ai module, we are getting our URL, which I showed you earlier on. We are then appending our query, assuming that there is a query and it's not currently recognizing another query. and we are making a call using a GET request to our server endpoint. The server endpoint gives us a response in an object, assuming there were no problems, and that there is a message, and the message is not equal to empty. We simply go display, or say in this case, data.message. That is the format. .message is where our response message will be. And it's as simple as that. You can do this from the browser. So let's open up a instance of Chrome. And go start the server. So we go yarn start, yes. Yarn is our new super fast npm install and npm start replacement. The whole process from building the project to starting the project is much more streamlined thanks to Yarn. So I've added that to the README. So now we have the server started. I can simply go to my web browser and enter localhost 4567 /API/ask Q for our query, and let's go, what is the weather in Paris? So the client essentially makes this exact same call with the query. And there you have it. So you can see here that we have our message, which is our response, the type, which is weather, and the question, which is this. So again, as simple as that. And you can see just how easy it is to extend all of this code out from the basics of pulling things in, converting it to natural language, and assigning a response using these super simple, easy to define skills. So, this seems like a really mystical thing. It seems like it should be quite difficult, but in reality, it's actually very simple. The whole process, I would say there's less than 1,000 lines of code to build an entire AI with all of those skills. If you remove all the skills, it's probably about 150, 200 lines of code in total. And most of it is just kind of boilerplate code anyway. So that's probably enough code for now. You can check this out on GitHub, as always. I'll be updating this fairly consistently. And let's move up topside for our outro. So now that you've seen how we have defined all of the various server communication parts, how natural language is broken down, how to train the natural language classifier, and how it pulls in a response to the skills, hopefully you get a kind of broader understanding of how straightforward the whole process is, and hopefully it demystifies at least a portion of what has been done to make this happen. Again, not a whole lot of code. What I showed you, despite not showing you all of the various bits and pieces, that is essentially how the code works. Like I said, if you have any sort of programming expertise with Node.js, or you're just looking to get into Node.js, this should be accessible. I think part 3 will probably be the more interesting of the 3 videos, as we will be defining a brand new skill from scratch ourselves, writing all the code for that, and showing you how that then works with the client. I would imagine that anyone looking to get into this and build their own skills will be able to do so pretty rapidly after seeing that video. Not a whole lot to it either, so make sure you guys tune in for that. That'll be next week, this time next week in fact. As ever, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thumbs it down. Feel free to just subscribe. I will be posting fairly constant updates to the project in terms of my own progress on a fairly regular basis, and also you're gonna get the latest parts to this series as well. So until then, have a good one.